Good afternoon, everybody who's joined us so far. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and we'll start in just a couple of minutes to allow some other people to join. Good afternoon, Chris. I can see the questions on my other screen. Okay, let's go for it. So, welcome to everybody who's joined us this afternoon. We are going to talk to you about ISO 22000. Just a little bit about who we are. So NQA, we are a certification body based in the UK predominantly. We have offices globally. Our head office for this region is in the UK. For our food business, actually, we're bigger in other countries, but it's all managed through the UK with NQA. Just a couple of slides to tell you who we are, what certification areas we specialise in. And we have training services as well. At the moment, all of our training courses are online, so a really good time to try and attend training courses. I know I like not having to go anywhere. And this is me. So we are going to, the webinar will last probably about 45 minutes. If anyone's got any questions, you can put them in the question box. I'll answer questions at the end. And the webinar is being recorded and it will be circulated once we've finished. So myself, I'm the food certification manager for NQA. I have worked in the certification industry for over 15 years. I've specialised in food safety, but all the way from sort of farming to delivery or to retail to actually feeding people. My position here at NQA is, well, my responsibilities are to oversee the accreditation and our certification for food safety management systems, and making sure that we stay up to date with everything that's going on in the food industry, cascading and training auditors accordingly. So this is what we're going to go through today, with a really sort of overview of the ISO 22000 standard. I'm not going to go through every single clause. What I've done is I've picked out bits in each clause that might need further clarification, or we get lots of questions over. By doing that, you'll get sort of tips on how to implement the standard. We'll look at some of the new and updated clauses and how to prepare for a transition, and just common queries that we get with the ISO 22000 standard. So first of all, what is ISO 22000? So ISO 22000 is an ISO food safety management systems standard. It was first developed in, or first published, sorry, in 2005. It was published in response, it was developed in response to a number of food safety crises, such as mad cow disease and some food fraud instances. It's a global standard that looks at supply chains in food supply chains. It starts all the way from farm, again, all the way to manufacturing and catering, food packaging, and then the auxiliary services. So people that make machinery for use in the food industry, they can also have ISO 22000. And the biggest thing is that the ISO 22000 standard facilitated the harmonisation of international food safety regulations. So we're going to be talking about the transition or the revision of ISO 22000 that was reissued in 2018. The original deadline for existing clients to transition to the new standard was June this year. Due to COVID, that deadline has been extended until the end of 2021. And we have found a lot of clients last year, lots of audits had to go remote or be deferred for a number of months. So lots of people have waited until later in 2021 to transition to the new version of the standard. The new standard adopts a high-level structure, which some people may be familiar with, such as in 9001, 14001. It's a core high-level structure that has common terms and definitions which cannot be changed. The food safety elements are incorporated into this high-level structure. This is particularly good when you're implementing a number of management systems. So lots of elements can be combined to address more than one standard. The 2018 standard has brought in the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle, which is I quite like this way of working. At the end of the day, what are we all trying to do? We plan it, we do it, we check it, we act upon it, and we start all over again. So it's a nice way of thinking, but it's also important to understand how the standard incorporates the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So looking at the standard, the requirement clauses start in section 4. 4, 5, 6 and 7 is all our plan phase, and then section 8, operation, that's our doing, what are we actually doing. And then performance evaluation in section 9, we're checking what we've done. And then in section 10, improvement, we're then acting upon the monitoring and the trends and everything that we've identified in the check stage. So just on the structural changes between 2005 and 2018 standard, already in 2005 standard we had interactive communication, we had system management, prerequisite programs and HACCP. So they are still relevant to 2018, but in 2018 we have new clauses around customer focus, leadership, the engagement of people. We've incorporated, well, they have incorporated the process approach and improvement and risk-based thinking and risk-based, evidence-based decision making, which we'll talk about later on. But that's really important with the ISO 22000 standard, which really brings it away from other food safety management system standards. And also relationship management, which comes in with sort of concepts of organisation and leadership, really to understand the relationships the business has in order to do things safely, effectively, and be able to continually improve. So process-based thinking and the process-based audit. So I mentioned this a little bit before. This is what I really like to point out with this is ISO 22000 is not a tick box exercise. It's not a checklist audit. It's a process-based audit. So this could mean that the auditor could follow a process within your business, and from following that process, the auditor can actually evaluate your compliance to a number of clauses. So by following the production of a product, they could look at your planning, they could look at your doing, your check-in and your acting. So by doing that, they're actually covering every clause of the standard. It's a different mindset from people that are used to inspections, you know, that the auditor's there with a checklist. Are you doing this? Are you doing that? ISO 22000 is more, let's see what you're doing, let's follow the process, and from that they can assess your compliance of clauses of the standard. So risk-based thinking, the best way to decide how you carry out an activity is to look at the risks involved in the process. Obviously anything that is high risk, possibly because it has a potential to go wrong, or that the consequences could be quite bad or severe, and then you'd want to you know, put more focus on that activity. I always use some examples like pest control. If pest control is a problem, you have a problem with pests, are you just going to continue to have pest control in once a month, or whatever? You know, if a standard says you have to have the pest control in once a month, but it's a problem, then you're going to up that frequency and you're going to have them in more often. Similarly, if pest control is not a problem, or certain months of the year is not a problem, you might want to relax the frequency a little bit. And the ISO 22000 standard gives you the flexibility to decide for yourself, obviously as long as the regulations are met, the frequency in which you do things. And just to mention that the 22000 standard doesn't give you a specific method on how to risk assess your management system. It does specify that you should look at organisational and operational risks. So your organisational risks might be things out of your control, like weather, pandemics. Your operational risks may be your food safety hazards. They will come under operational risks. However, the standard does require you to document the decision-making process when you're doing your risk assessment. So there's a section at the beginning of the standard with the definitions. Lots of people don't know it's there, but I find it really helpful when people are trying to interpret clauses of the standard. If they don't quite know what a phrase or a word actually means and what they're asking you to do, there is the definition section at the beginning of the standard, and it's been updated as well. So in the 2018 version of the standard, they have changed the wording in the definition of significant food safety hazards, control measures, action criterion, competence, interested parties, outsourcing, and risk. So it's really important that if you are looking at trying to implement or to understand the standard, that you know that that section's there. I find it really helpful. So we touched on this before, but sections 4 to 10 are the requirements of the standard. These are the requirements that you need to conform to. And it's important to understand that where the standard specifies that an organisation shall have something in place, that these are mandatory requirements. And these are the requirements that auditors, external and internal, will be looking to gather evidence to verify your performance against these clauses. In the next section of the standards, or section 4, context of the organisation. This is new in Annex SL and Item 22,000/2018. It's important for an organisation to be able to run an effective, safe food safety management system, to understand the context of their organisation. And the standard asks us to identify external and internal issues, along with, you know, what are those issues? Can we do anything to satisfy them or to reduce them? So I'll just pick out, you know, a few. So external issues will include sort of cultural, political, environmental issues, competitors, other companies that, you know, may be seen as your competitors, they can be an issue. Laws, at the moment, COVID restrictions could be an external issue that we're all facing. Internal issues could be the competency of your staff, working conditions, your resources, you know, your machinery, equipment, your work environment, those sort of things. So then we're asked to identify the interested parties to your business. We see some really funny things when people are looking at these. So you're asked to identify and analyse how they can affect how you achieve effectiveness of your food safety management system. Some that people often don't identify would be your neighbours. You know, your neighbours have, they're interested in what you're doing. You know, why are they interested in what you're doing? What can you do to help with that? Obviously, your suppliers, they're interested parties because they're supplying you with their products. Consumers that are eating your products, obviously they're an interested party, and there's lots of others there. So I've given you a few to start people thinking. Lots of people say that their interested parties are suppliers, consumers, their staff, and that's it. There's lots of people to consider. And if you do consider them, you identify them, you consider them, you make your company a better company. So the next part of the standard is the scope of your food safety management system. So it's not new, but it's been revised, and think simple but concise. So if you are packing onions, if you're growing onions and packing onions and selling them, you know, what is the scope of your food safety management system? So it may be the growing, grading, packing of onions. And Don't put any fancy words in just for the sake of putting fancy words in, because it gets translated into different languages and it ends up not meaning anything. If there's something in your packaging or your processing that it will affect the food safety element of your product, put it in there. So if you are, the example here, fermentation, carbonation and packing of red wine into glass bottles. Obviously into glass bottles is really important because it could be in boxes, it could be in bulk bags. It's important to understand what it is you're actually doing. And most organisations need to buy raw materials, they need to process the raw materials, and they almost certainly are all going to sell it. So these things are not necessarily going to be included in the scope of your food safety management system. You strip it out and say what it is you're actually doing. What is the food safety management system there to manage? Leadership. So this was new in Annex SL. Leadership is very important. So the standard states that top management should demonstrate leadership and commitment with respect to the food safety management system. So who is top management? So according to ISO 22000, top management is the person or group of people who direct or control an organisation at the highest level. I explain it as if there was a major or severe food safety issue, who ultimately would be responsible? Who would be taken to court, in fact? That person is your top management, and because they have ultimate responsibility, they need to show leadership and commitment to your food safety management system or standard. And when an external auditor comes to audit you, they will expect to discuss this with them, not with their designated person, that not with the quality manager, not with the technical manager. Ultimately, the top management is responsible. So we need to understand that they actually understand what it is that what the food safety management system is. So just on the leadership, the 2018 version has added sort of objectives and the strategic plans of the business. It's important to have these in place to drive improvement, and we would expect that top management would be involved with those. So then as we move on, we are going to plan what it is we're actually going to do. So we know our scope. We now need to know how are we going to do it? What do we need? And this section is asking you exactly that. So what are you trying to achieve? What could stop you from achieving your objective? How are you going to address that? Can you turn your risks into opportunities? Who's responsible for turning those risks into opportunities? Who needs to take action? And how are you going to check whether those actions are effective? So as we mentioned before, operational risks, they could be controlled by your HACCP plan, your PRPs, OPRPs, CCPs, and even your emergency preparedness response plan. And other risks that will affect the entire management system would come under your organisational risks. Some of those organisational risks, they could be sporadic, they could never happen. If there's a possibility that they could happen, then we should be prepared to know what to do in that event. I don't think anybody had in their risks and opportunities or risks that a COVID pandemic would happen or a global pandemic. I don't think that could have been foreseen. But if they'd already identified a risk of adverse weather effects, that you couldn't get to the site, for example, or a number of people could get to the site and you couldn't ship things, you couldn't travel anywhere, I'm sure that the response plan for the COVID pandemic would have been able to use another one of those risk assessments and tweaked it for what the actual risks are that we're facing. So when setting objectives for the food safety management system, they need to be achievable, but they need to be relevant. So they need to be consistent with the food safety policy. You need to be able to measure them. They need to be within sort of requirements of your regulatory requirements or your customer requirements. You need to be able to monitor them. You need to be able to verify that monitoring. You need to have communicated them with the business or stakeholders. And then we need to maintain those objectives, continually monitor and verify until they're met, and we need to document them. So lots of companies already have sort of quality objectives. We would suggest that if you already have quality objectives, it might be worth adding in some food safety objectives into the same format that you already have objectives, so that you don't need to duplicate this with anything else. If you're running more than one ISO standard, you should be able to get away with having one set of objectives. Really important, they have to be relevant. You can't just say our objective is to be the most successful donut supplier in the world. How are you actually going to monitor and measure that? Then we move on to support. So what resources do we need to consider in our food safety management system? So resources are not just raw materials or equipment that you need. Resources include people, they include your infrastructure and your environment. Within support, we also need to control our external providers, and our external providers could be pest control contractors, they could be the people that service our forklift trucks. So think wider than just an external provider being a supplier. We then look at competency. So what competency do we need in the business to be able to carry out the activities that we plan to do? And the ISO 22018 version has brought in a different way of thinking. Competency is not just that person was trained. It's, was that training effective? Or is their experience above and beyond any training that you could give them? So think about assessing people's competency not based just on training. And if they have had training, then work out a way to measure whether that training was effective. Communication. So the standard is helpful in providing you a framework to depict a communication process within an organisation and to your stakeholders. And documented information. As you go through the standard, not everything has to be documented, but there are a few things that they stipulate must be documented. And it needs to be easily identifiable in a format that can be retrieved and opened and available to the right people at the right time. We also need to make sure our documented information is maintained. So is it up to date? If we say we're going to review it every 12 months, you might not need to update it every 12 months, but have you got record that you reviewed it every 12 months? So the operations section of the standard, this is the core of our 22,000 standards. This is our do of our Plan, Do, Check, Act. This incorporates our prerequisite programs. The ISO 22000 standard tells us that we should identify or consider our prerequisite programs in relation to ISO TS 22002. So there's a different part to each part of the food chain. If we don't use ISO 22000, TS 22000, are there customer requirements that we should be complying to? Regulatory requirements. Our traceability and emergency response plans, as we mentioned these before, so traceability is as it says, so can your products be traced from raw materials all the way to where it's dispatched, where it's sold? How do we do that traceability? How is it labelled? And then the emergency response with regards to traceability. So should there be a product recall, then can we trace the products? So looking at our hazards now, particularly in the operations section, our PRPs will already have been established. We can now look at all of our hazards and put them through a decision tree. But before we do that, we need a multidisciplinary team with a leader who are competent to looking at the hazards of the business. The standard does stipulate that we need to evaluate the hazards based on severity of harm and probability of occurrence, and this needs to be documented. This could be your decision tree of your hazards. You put them through a decision tree and you decide then from that decision tree whether they are managed or controlled by your PRPs, or are they a CCP or an OPRP, at which time you would then decide what measures you need to put in place, what are the critical limits or your action criteria when you're looking at OPRPs, what can't be exceeded, how do you monitor it, and which corrections or corrective actions will be carried out if your critical limits or your action criteria is not met, and who's responsible for the activity. So do you define that the people actually monitoring them are responsible for monitoring and correction, or do they monitor and then decide, if it's out of spec, who do they tell, who's responsible for putting it through corrective action? And also you need to decide which records you maintain, what format you maintain them, and how can you keep them in a format that you can continually monitor the results, so you can look at any trends. So non-conforming products. So there needs to be a process on how you manage non-conforming products. This could be when your limits for your CCPs or your OPRPs are not met. the standard says that you must treat the product as potentially unsafe, and then they also, so if you're treating the product as potentially unsafe, for you to be able to identify that you've said that product's unsafe, and then you need to decide, as per your process, what's the next steps. If the product's already gone out to clients, retailers, etc., then you must initiate a withdrawal or a recall and notify all the relevant interested parties. The performance evaluation. So there's three main ways in which to evaluate performance. Process monitoring. So this is your results from monitoring your PRPs, CCPs, etc. You will need to conduct internal audits. This will tell you how you are performing against your food safety management system, and also management review. So management review is bringing everything together, doing all your trend analysis and reviewing everything, making decisions on what the next steps are. So there's some new elements to be considered when looking at management review. The standard has a long list of things for which you need to consider. Some of these things are changes in context, so changes in your internal and external issues, information on the performance and effectiveness of your food safety management systems, so looking at your trends, the adequacy of resources, so do they need more people, do they need new equipment, do they need different equipment, is the lighting good enough, things like that. And are there any opportunities for continual improvement? And then from the management review, there will be outputs. So, and this must be documented. So you must consider any actions that need to be taken, who's responsible for them, and also any changes that may be needed to the food safety management system and how you manage that. Improvement, so a methodology to capture, manage and resolve needs to be undertaken and documented. So this is about your non-conformities, so it might be internal non-conformities or external non-conformities. What are you going to do to correct it? You look at the root cause, the correction, the corrective action, do you have preventative action, etc. And also consider, could this happen again? And then review the effectiveness of any corrective action that you've put in place. And again, make changes to your food safety management system if needed. Continual improvement, nice and short really. If the requirements of ISO 22000 are established, implemented, regularly reviewed and challenged, then continual improvement will happen naturally. So we're coming to the end of the presentation here. So for NQA, we give regular food safety management system updates and blogs via our website. These are also posted on LinkedIn. We have an ISO 22000 implementation guide, which you can download from our website, and also a transition checklist. So the transition checklist is designed for you to be able to do sort of an internal audit of your food safety management system. So you can identify any gaps between what you've got and the standard that you're trying to achieve. And we also have an associate partner program for if you need any help with implementation or readiness for your audit, you can consult our associate partner program and connect with a consultant that could help you. We also offer advanced training courses. There's a few here on the screen. You can sign up for these on our website. They're really good for continual improvement and CPD. I know that I'm trying to do as many as possible whilst we're at home and can do these remotely. Let's see if we've got any questions. Okay, so we've got a question here. Is there any correlation between this standard and the BRC? So the BRC standard is a product certification audit. It's a food safety management system also, but it looks at product safety rather than just the organisation have a management system to enable to produce safe products. It's more of a, the BRC is more of a how can I put this? It's more restrictive in the way it tells you what you need to do to meet a requirement. You have to have certain things in place. The ISO standards, where it's more of a food management system standard, it tells you what the requirement is and you can decide how you meet that requirement yourself. That's the biggest difference. Also, BRC is GFSI recognised. ISO 22000 is not GFSI, but FSSC 22000 is GFSI benchmarked. So if suppliers require you to have a GFSI recognised certification, you can have FSSC 22000, which is ISO 22000, plus your PRP standard 22002 and additional FSSC requirements, which bridge the gap between ISO 22000 and GFSI requirements. I hope that answers your question. If there's no more questions, I will say thank you for your time. It's been really great sharing some of our experiences with you. Thank you and have a good day.